Even though tapping for an issue is an individual process where we approach each experience in its own unique way, there are a number of fundamentals that underline the healing process that when we access those, it makes it so much easier for us to create transformation. For me, a number of these healing processes have evolved into tapping phrases that I use over and over again. And so over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite tapping phrases that I incorporate into almost every single round of tapping that make a huge difference in the results that I have. And I hope you enjoy these ideas so you can incorporate them into your tapping too. This is Gene Monterastelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 550, originally aired March 15th, 2023. Hi everyone, I hope this finds you well wherever you are. Whatever time of day you're getting a chance to spend a little time with me, I really appreciate it. Today is the first of a multi-part series where we're going to be talking about some of my favorite tapping phrases. And the really cool thing is, this particular series came from a conversation from one of my listeners who sent me a note saying that they really didn't like this particular phrase. And so I'd love to share with you what the phrase is, why it is the phrase that I use more often than any other phrase, and how I responded to that conversation. But before we do that, two quick announcements. Number one, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to help eliminate self-sabotage. It's absolutely free. All you got to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on that big blue button, enter your email address, and over the course of the next 10 days, every single day, you will receive another bite-sized nugget of tapping goodness that you can implement to help you manage self-sabotage. Then at the end of 10 days, you can take that one that works the best for you and integrate it into your life. Number two, I want to send a big shout out and thank you to all the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. These are people who voluntarily support the podcast so that you can receive these every single week. If you would like to be one of those amazing supporters and receive some really cool free bonuses, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, all of this started with an email. It was a really thoughtful, deliberate email that came from one of my readers and listeners. And basically the email said is, I really appreciate your work, but the reason why I've never purchased any of your products or done any of your programs is I have a real problem with one of the phrases that you use. And that phrase is, I recognize the fact. And oftentimes in my tapping scripts, that phrase is followed by something that isn't actually a fact. And it felt incongruent for her to be doing that. And so I would just like to share with you my disposition on this particular phrase, why I use it, why I think it's valuable. And I'm not trying to persuade you and make you use this particular phrase in your tapping, but I think it would be useful to understand the disposition I'm coming from, as it may aid you in your tapping so that you can get better results. So the idea itself comes from an idea that I was introduced to by Milton Erikson. Milton Erikson is considered the Dean of American Hypnotism. Brilliant man. I love his writings. I love his recordings. I was never fortunate enough to meet him or train with him, but was very much impacted by his work. And one of the ideas that I got from Milton's work was, all transformation starts by stating what is. And basically what that phrase means is that it is difficult, almost impossible for me to create transformation if I don't know where I'm standing, I don't know what I'm feeling, and I don't know what the context is. You know, it's kind of like, if you called me and said, if you're here visiting New York City and you called me and said, so how do I get to Central Park? Well, I can't answer that question because I don't know where you're standing when you're asking that particular question. Because the answer to that question is going to be radically different if you are in Lower Manhattan or the Bronx or over here in Brooklyn. Like, we need to know where we're starting. And the reality is, for me, that transformation begins by leveling with myself, about being honest with where I am. So it is useful for us to state as clearly as we can an understanding and assessment of where we are. Now, inside of that, it might not be super clear. There are times in which I am tapping where it's just like, there's not even words. There's just this primal grunt. And as I'm tapping and I'm tapping and I'm tapping, and all of a sudden, it turns into, I am angry. And as I keep tapping, I am angry turns into, I am angry at, I'm angry that, I'm angry at something specific. And so clarity comes. And so, all transformation starts by stating what is, oftentimes might have statements of unclarity. So that's where we start bumping up against this word fact. Because the reality is oftentimes we are tapping on things that are not facts. But for me, and this is where the key part is, the tapping phrases I use are not about saying what is true. The tapping phrases I use are about a conversation that I'm having with my subconscious mind. Because most of the transformation that I am trying to do is I'm trying to transform an understanding or a belief in my subconscious mind. And I'm sure you've been in this circumstance before where you're like, well, intellectually I know, but you're having a different emotional response. And so dealing with the subconscious mind, for me, I oftentimes dealing with the subconscious mind is trying to negotiate with a willful 6-year-old, which is a really difficult thing to do. And it's a really difficult space for us to be in. And if I am fighting with my subconscious mind, and this is true with anybody else, if you're fighting with someone, it's very difficult for you to present them with new information and change their mind. And so for me, when I'm tapping, I'm saying things not because they are true, but to engage my subconscious mind into a place that creates transformation. And so I use the phrase, I recognize the fact, as a way of acknowledging what the subconscious mind believes. And so for me, when I say the word fact, I'm almost putting quotes, or as my friends in the UK would say, inverted commas around the word fact. That's not actually a fact. But I recognize the fact. And sometimes the fact is actually a feeling. I recognize the fact I'm really overwhelmed. So I'm acknowledging the fact I'm feeling something specific. Or I recognize the fact there is a part of me that believes. That is honest and that is true. I'm not saying that what it believes is a fact or what it believes is true, but by engaging with and negotiating with these parts in that particular way, what it does is, and this is one of the earliest phrases from my work as a tapper, is how do we turn our issues into our allies? And one of the fastest ways to turn an issue into an ally is to acknowledge the feeling, the sensation, the belief's disposition. And acknowledging it doesn't mean that I'm saying it's true. And so for me, the shorthand phrase that makes that super easy to do is, I recognize the fact. And so if you look at my tapping scripts, if you look at my tapping longs, you look at anything else, almost all of them begin with some version of that statement. I recognize the fact, or I give myself permission to recognize the fact. And again, fact is in quotes there, but that's the reason why I'm engaging with it in that way. And so as I have been working on this and writing about this, not just the back and forth that I had with that one particular client or one particular reader, I've actually heard from other folks who don't like the phrase as well. And so again, I am not trying to talk you into using a phrase that is unuseful for you. One of the things that I've gotten really more deliberate about is someone is like, well, is that movie good? I'm like, well, I don't know. I liked it. It was good for me to experience it, but that's different than the movie being good. There's a movie I saw years and years ago. After seeing the movie, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And the only person in my life is my friend Bob that I can recommend this to. And I sent him a text message. I'm like, hey, I just saw this movie. I loved it. You'll love it. And I can't think of anybody else to recommend it to. And he replied, he goes, actually, I saw it yesterday and I had the exact same thought. I love the movie and you're the only person in my life I could recommend it to. And so say all of that to share that with this particular disposition, with this particular phrase, with anything else, the most important question is, how's it working for you? For me, using the phrase, "I recognize the fact," is so useful as a way of engaging with my subconscious mind and being present to the transformational process so that it is less of a fight. It is more of an allied-ship relationship. If it is not a useful phrase for you, I would propose that you might find the idea that all transformation starts by stating what is something that might be useful for you. And if you need to find a different phrase to share that in a way that feels congruent with the way you understand your system and transformation and the way your body works and the way your subconscious mind works, awesome. Like, I'm always offering this in a descriptive way, not a prescriptive way. I'm describing what I am doing. I'm not prescribing what you should be doing. So that is the reason why I recognize the fact is one of my favorite tapping phrases. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, how it works for you. I can be reached at support@tappingqna.com. I'd love that. If you're listening to this on the website, go down to the comment section, add your feedback. I always learn from conversations like this. Come back to the podcast over the course of the next couple of weeks. We're going to be doing more of these phrases. I'm going to be sharing phrases that I use a lot, why I love them. And again, sharing the meaning behind them might make it easier for you to decide how and if you want to use those particular things. If there's someone in your life who might appreciate a conversation like this, please be our ambassador, pass it along. Don't spam your inbox and send it to everybody in the world. But you might know one or two people who could really benefit from this particular conversation. And if you send it to them and say, "Hey, I was thinking of you, you might love this," even if they don't click on it, the fact that you have sent it to them is going to make a difference to them, and their day is going to be a little brighter. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Remember, in podcasting parlance, subscribe is always free. Just go to wherever you get audio online: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, basically everywhere you get audio. Search for Tapping Q&A. Click follow, click subscribe. Most importantly, turn on those notifications so each time a new episode comes out, you are notified right away. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, is Gene Monterastelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Monterastelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Monterastelli and Tapping Q&A.